Under a rust-colored sky bristling with electrical filaments, Corporal Theo Marin adjusted the pressure seals on his suit for the fourth time in 2 minutes. It wasn't that the atmosphere of Veridesa 9 was particularly dangerous. His suit's diagnostics showed it was technically breathable, in the same way that swimming in soup is technically hydration, but he'd seen one too many planets that advertised mild and hospitable, only to throw up an acid hailstorm 5 minutes after touchdown. And besides, he didn't like the way the clouds crackled. Clouds weren't supposed to crackle. His dropship, charmingly named Dart 6, had gone from orbit to crash in less time than it took him to butter his last synthetic bagel. The landing had been neither graceful nor by the book, unless that book was 101 Ways to Enter a Planet Through Panic. What remained of the hull was now an improvised sculpture lodged in a shallow crater, half covered in pollen that glittered like powdered emeralds. The NAV beacon blinked feebly. The AI had given up and was playing a soft jazz funeral loop. "Well," Theo muttered, tugging his pulse rifle off the magnetized wall, "first contact protocol states, don't shoot unless provoked. Second contact protocol is just crying, I think." He activated his shoulder cam, sending real-time footage back to command, assuming command still existed. The last message he'd received had been a garbled voice repeating, "We're losing the colony ships. Go to Veridesa. Seek the signal." And then static. That had been 12 days ago. Theo climbed out of the wreckage and stepped into the light. Veridesa 9 did not look like a battlefield. In fact, it didn't look like any war zone he'd ever seen, which was either comforting or deeply unsettling. Towering trees with luminous, woven canopies stretched in spiral patterns toward the horizon. The ground had a strange spring to it, like he was walking on tightly packed moss that had a gym membership. A faint bioluminescent fog curled around his boots. Everything pulsed faintly, as if the planet itself was breathing. Then came the sound. A gentle, high-pitched hum, somewhere between a lullaby and a warning alarm. It grew louder the farther he walked. Theo paused beside a bulbous rock formation that may or may not have blinked at him, and glanced at his scanner. The tech was going haywire, spinning, blinking, occasionally quoting poetry. The electromagnetic interference here was off the charts. Ahead, the foliage opened up like a curtain, revealing a cluster of structures. Not buildings, exactly, more like enormous shells, shaped like spiraling horns and latticed with what looked like living vines. Light emanated from within them, not from bulbs or torches, but from strands of flora threaded through their walls. The entire village shimmered as though dipped in starlight. He took a cautious step forward. A splash. Then a second. Theo looked down. There was a pool beneath him, perfectly circular, and, he realized too late, very much real. With a flailing attempt at dignity, he slid straight into it. The water was lukewarm and smelled vaguely of citrus and regret. When he surfaced, coughing and sputtering, a dozen pairs of eyes were on him. He froze. They weren't human. Tall, slender, draped in flowing robes and with skin in various shades of blue, violet, and bronze, the creatures around him looked like humanoid elves pulled from some fever dream of an ancient mythology scholar who'd majored in bioengineering. Their ears were long, arching back and curling slightly at the tips, and their eyes gleamed like polished gemstones. Tattoos glowed faintly along their exposed arms and necks, shifting as if alive. Theo held up both hands, letting the rifle sink beneath the surface with a regretful plop. Hello. I come in peace. Mostly wet. But peace. The crowd remained silent. A few tilted their heads. One old figure squinted suspiciously, then whispered something to a companion. And then, from behind them, a child's voice piped up. A little girl stepped forward, tiny, with eyes too large for her face and a cascade of silvery hair tumbling down her back. She smiled brightly and pointed a small, glowing finger at Theo. "Mom," she said with perfect clarity, "that's him." The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the planet itself had stopped rotating. Theo blinked. That's, who now? From the back of the crowd, a figure began moving forward. The sea of bodies parted, reverently, as a woman emerged. She was stunning in a way that was more elemental than aesthetic, like gravity had decided she was important. Her presence pulled attention to her like iron filings to a magnet. Her long ears were adorned with bands of metal and crystal. Her robe shifted colors with her every breath. She looked at him. Not like someone looking at an intruder or a stranger. No. She looked like someone seeing a ghost they weren't sure they believed in. Then her lips parted, and she whispered something in her native tongue. Theo squinted. Did she just call me the Ember Bearer? Or was that, wet idiot? Kinda hard to tell with the accent. Someone in the back of the crowd chuckled. It sounded suspiciously like a wheeze. The Queen, if that's what she was, stepped forward and extended a hand. Theo hesitated, then took it, water dripping from his glove. Her skin was warm, pulsing faintly beneath the surface like something with a second heartbeat. Welcome, she said in halting English. You are foretold. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Look, I think there's been a mistake. I was just sent to check on some missing colony ships. I think you might have your Messiah mixed up. Happens all the time. Super common mistake. The Queen did not laugh. Her gaze intensified. Behind her, the little girl beamed and whispered to someone, he's funny. Like the old rocks. Theo resisted the urge to say something sarcastic and instead gave a weak smile. The villagers began to murmur, some falling to their knees. A few reached toward him like pilgrims, their fingers trembling. One of them held up a scroll that projected a holographic image of a man surrounded by fire, holding a glowing key in one hand and something that looked suspiciously like a lunchbox in the other. Oh, that could be me, Theo said, peering at the image. If you squint. And if that's not a lunchbox, but, like, a cosmic battery or something. The Queen released his hand. You have returned, she said solemnly. Theo rubbed the back of his neck, soaked, confused, possibly hallucinating from crash trauma. Sure. Why not? Let's go with that. He looked at the girl. She looked back with utter confidence. And then said, Mom, can I keep him? Theo blinked. The Queen raised one elegant brow. The village healer muttered, we don't have a protocol for this. And Theo, standing drenched in the sacred spring of an alien civilization, gave the only response he could think of. I'm house-trained. They didn't call it a prison. That would have been too aggressive for a people who spoke like wind chimes and moved like poetry. No, Theo had been granted sanctuary, inside a structure made of curved bone and whispering vines, with no visible doors and only one exit, which conveniently opened and closed based on whether or not you were being trusted at the moment. He had tried to poke at it. It responded by politely humming and growing thorns. He stopped poking. The inside of the chamber was unnervingly peaceful. Bioluminescent moss coated the ceiling in soft, pulsing constellations. Every surface was either plush or hummed with a quiet kind of sentience, and the temperature remained a steady 22 degrees, like the room had decided long ago that comfort was the only thing it had to offer. A soft drone echoed in the distance. Probably local insects or a very sleepy security system. Theo paced. Then sat. Then stood again. A small pot of what looked like soup had been left for him, green, steaming, and wiggling slightly. The aroma was equal parts cinnamon and alien armpit. He had taken one spoonful and promptly decided to name it soup regret. The pot now sat on the farthest ledge, covered with a scrap of fabric that did absolutely nothing to suppress the smell. They hadn't taken his communicator, probably because it didn't work. The moment he stepped foot in the village, all signals cut out. Even the AI in his suit helmet had gone eerily quiet, as if sulking in the back of his brain. He tapped the side of the device now, and it gave a weak chirp, followed by what might have been a sigh. "So that's a no on the rescue party, huh?" he muttered. "Talking to spirits, outsider." Theo turned. The wall had opened without a sound, revealing a tall figure in armor that gleamed like obsidian carved by lightning. The newcomer's face was sharp and severe, like a mountain carved with a grudge. His long ears were adorned with thin metallic cuffs, and a strange double-bladed weapon hung from his hip. "Chiron," the man said simply. "Queen Cirelli sent me. I'm your escort." "Escort," Theo repeated, standing. "That's nice. Friendly. Better than handler or immediate threat to our way of life." Chiron didn't smile. "It's a working title." They stepped into the village. The paths were made of polished roots, smooth underfoot, and the air shimmered faintly with microscopic spores that refracted sunlight into soft rainbows. Towering trees curved overhead like arches in a cathedral, and floating lanterns drifted lazily above their heads, occasionally murmuring lullabies in a language Theo couldn't decipher. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked. "To the Hall of Echoes. The council wishes to see you." "Let me guess, more prophecies. Or are we skipping straight to the sacrificial bonfire part?" Chiron glanced at him. "You talk often. I find it keeps me from screaming." At the heart of the village stood a massive structure, grown, not built. It resembled a petrified lotus flower, its petals spread wide to form an open dome. As they entered, Theo's eyes widened. Inside, holographic murals danced in the air, stories told through images of fire, light, and stars. Figures swirled across the dome, some wielding strange instruments, others commanding beasts that looked like flying stingrays with teeth. Queen Cirelli waited in the center, surrounded by 6 other figures, each bearing a different mark on their robes: fire, stone, water, wind, light, and void. "The council. You stand," she said, "in the place where memory breathes." Theo squinted at the floating images. "Well, your memory has excellent CGI. "Silence," said one of the counselors, an elderly female whose voice crackled like dry leaves. "The signs align. The Ember Bearer has come. His blood awakened the beacon." Theo raised his hands. "Okay, let's just pause the space opera for a second. I am not an Ember Bearer. I don't even know what an ember is in this context. Unless we're talking barbecue, in which case, yes, I once grilled a steak with a plasma torch, but that's not prophecy material." Cirelli took a step forward. 2 nights ago, the Heartstone pulsed for the first time in 6 generations. It reacted to your presence. Chiron added, reluctantly, "We confirmed the energy spike." He touched the pool at the shrine, and it responded. "I fell in," Theo corrected. "I fell in." There was splashing. Possibly some screaming. "The prophecy is not literal," another counselor said. "The manner does not matter. The contact does." Theo rubbed his face. "Okay, let's say, just for kicks, that I am this Ember dude. What happens now? Do I get a cape? A spaceship? A flaming sword?" "You receive knowledge," Cirelli replied. "Of who you are. Of who we were. And what you might become." As if on cue, the center of the chamber lowered into a spiral staircase made of light. The air shimmered. "Follow," the queen said. "Your truth waits." Theo looked at Chiron, who shrugged as if to say, "Welcome to the madness." "Fine," he sighed. "Let's go spelunking into destiny." The stairs descended into what felt like the planet's lungs. As they moved deeper, the temperature dropped, and the walls began to glow faintly with flowing script, writing that slithered like liquid silver across stone. They arrived in a chamber unlike anything Theo had seen before. A giant orb hovered in midair, crackling faintly, encased in a lattice of metal and crystal veins. Surrounding it were 6 empty thrones. On the floor beneath, concentric rings pulsed with a dull red light. Runes lined the edges, glowing softly as Theo approached. He stepped forward. The orb pulsed. Once. Twice. Then exploded with light. Images filled the chamber. A galaxy in flames. Ships of bone and metal clashing with angular machines. A woman who looked like Sorelli, only younger, leading a desperate retreat. A glowing key, shaped like a helix of stars, passing from hand to hand, until it vanished into the void. Theo staggered back. What was that? The last war, Sorelli whispered. When the Ark was sealed. When our kind scattered. Okay, I have a lot of questions. But let me start with this one, why me? The orb dimmed. Then projected one final image, of a man, standing alone, wreathed in light. His face was blurry. But his posture, his build, too familiar. Theo stared. No. That's not. Chiron stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. What? Theo shook his head. That can't be me. I've never even been here before. The orb pulsed again. And this time, a symbol lit up on Theo's wrist, one he hadn't noticed until now, hidden beneath dried blood and grime. It matched the rune on the floor. Oh, he said, blinking. That's new. Sorelli smiled, slow and knowing. You carry the mark. Theo stared at it. Then looked around the chamber. Then back at the queen. Okay, he said finally. Let's say I'm your glowing chosen barbecue messiah. What now? Sorelli's expression turned solemn. Now, we prepare you for what's to come. Chiron sighed. Great. I'm babysitting a cosmic accident. Theo grinned. And I'm trusting an elf with a laser stick. We're off to a great start. Theo's training back in the Earth Coalition Marines had prepared him for many scenarios, orbital drops into acid storms, surprise ambushes from eight-legged miners with flamethrowers, even a 3-day diplomatic dinner with carnivorous plant ambassadors who didn't believe in utensils. What it had not prepared him for was etiquette lessons with a 6-year-old alien girl and a warrior scholar who spoke like every sentence had been sharpened with a chisel. Again, Chiron said, not even glancing up from the floating scroll hovering in front of him. You address the queen with Sorelli Tilverin, not just hey. There are syllables for a reason. Theo, seated cross-legged on a mat woven from something suspiciously breathing, scowled. What if I just bow dramatically and fall over? Cultural and entertaining. You're not here to entertain. Tell that to the dozen elders who laughed when I tripped over their vine offerings this morning. From across the open-air training terrace, little Allery sat on a stump chewing something neon and squishy, waving enthusiastically every time Theo looked her way. She had taken a shine to him after the fountain incident, following him like a giggling shadow, occasionally correcting his grammar or asking wildly inappropriate biological questions. The other day, she'd asked if his species reproduced by laying internal eggs or external ones. He still wasn't sure which answer would have disappointed her more. Today's session had been labeled cultural integration, but so far it was mostly Chiron glaring, Theo mispronouncing sacred vowels, and Allery giving him a thumbs up every time he survived another lesson. Chiron turned the scroll, revealing an ancient script that shimmered faintly with energy. This is your name, he said. In our tongue. Theo squinted. That looks like a stylized duck holding a spoon. It means, he who walks the broken pattern and carries the ember. Okay, but I'm still calling it spoon duck. Chiron groaned audibly and stood. You're impossible. And yet here I am. All your prophecy eggs in one sarcastic basket. The warrior moved to the edge of the terrace and looked out over the village. The sky was beginning to shift into its twilight phase, Veridessa's binary suns casting long shadows of orange and violet across the land. Lantern creatures floated lazily above, exuding warmth and music like drifting jellyfish with a karaoke habit. Theo stood and walked over to join him. You really don't like me, Huh. Chiron didn't answer immediately. Then, I don't believe in shortcuts. Or legends that conveniently walk into our lives soaked and clueless. Well, you're not wrong about the clueless part. Chiron turned, his expression unreadable. You laugh. But what rests beneath Eluan is no myth. The Ark is real. And if it wakes, everything changes. Theo thought about the orb, the visions, the strange mark on his wrist that hadn't faded. He still wasn't convinced any of this wasn't the result of a concussion or extremely fancy dream therapy. But something inside him, something low and instinctual, was beginning to itch. How long has it been down there? He asked. Since the War of Sundering. 5,000 cycles. It was locked when the stars turned red. That's an ominous sentence. That was an ominous time. They stood in silence a while longer, broken only by Allery shouting, "Kiss already," from her stump. Both men coughed and pretended they hadn't heard. Chiron eventually handed Theo a small, orb-shaped device etched with lines of light. This will guide you to the shrine. It reacts to your blood. Tomorrow, we begin your passage. Passage, Theo repeated. Like a test. Like a door. And a choice. Right. Because nothing around here is ever just one thing. Chiron gave him a rare, thin smile. You're learning. The next day, they departed before the second sun rose. The path led them through tunnels carved by time and thick with whispering vines. Creatures peeked from behind glowing fronds, some with too many eyes, others with none at all. The orb pulsed brighter the deeper they went, humming a rhythm that thrummed against Theo's bones. After 2 hours of climbing and slipping, Theo, not Chiron, who somehow walked like gravity was a polite suggestion, they reached the entrance to the shrine. It looked like a tree had grown directly out of a meteorite, branches twisting upward from molten stone. The doorway was framed by symbols he didn't recognize, but one glowed faintly in time with the mark on his wrist. Chiron stopped at the threshold. Only you may enter. Theo hesitated. That's not ominous at all. Chiron handed him a small dagger. It shimmered with blue light, weightless in his palm. If the shrine tests you, Chiron said, this will mark your truth. Cool. A glowing knife. Definitely not worried now. Theo stepped through. The air inside was thick, not with heat or humidity, but with presence. The space felt aware. As though it was watching. Or maybe dreaming. The walls pulsed with veins of light, reacting to his every breath. At the center, a pedestal waited, surrounded by 6 hovering crystals spinning slowly. As he approached, each crystal flared to life, projecting scenes into the air, memories not his own. Battles among the stars. A child holding a dying parent. A woman screaming as a door closed forever. Then a face like his, but older, worn by time. The figure reached toward him. Theo stepped back. The crystals whirled faster. A voice echoed in the chamber. Not in sound, but directly into his thoughts. Do you remember? ***. He swallowed. No. Should I? Do you accept what you are? ***. I don't even know what I am. Will you carry the ember? ***. The dagger pulsed in his hand. The mark on his wrist burned. His instincts screamed to leave, to run, to deny. But his legs didn't move. I'm not your chosen one, he said. I'm just the guy who fell into your pool. The chamber didn't laugh. But it pulsed again, once, gently. Then the dagger flared with blue fire and sliced a line across his palm. His blood, shimmering faintly, fell onto the pedestal. The crystals halted. The orb reappeared, splitting open. And the ark, dormant, ancient, sleeping beneath the planet's roots, stirred. Outside, Chiron stumbled as the earth beneath them rumbled. Across the village, lights flickered. And far above, satellites long thought dead blinked back to life. Back in the shrine, Theo looked at his bleeding palm, then at the open chamber. "Well," he said, breathless, "guess the door liked me." The voice in his head whispered one last word. "Welcome, asterisk asterisk." The morning after the shrine awoke, the entire village of Eluan buzzed like a beehive with caffeine addiction. Lantern creatures blinked erratically, children ran around with glowing sticks pretending to fight invisible space monsters, and elders convened in frantic knots of speculation that sounded like a mix between chanting and arguing about which apocalypse had better fashion sense. Theo sat cross-legged in the middle of it all, being aggressively groomed by a creature that looked like a cross between a possum and a portable fan. It had claimed him as its chosen one, or at least, that's what Allery said. It screeched as it nested in his hair and deposited tiny glowing stones down the back of his shirt. "I'm not even sure what part of this is ceremonial," Theo muttered, picking another glowing pebble out of his collar. Allery, perched nearby with a basket of iridescent fruit, grinned at him. "That's a clean It only bonds with beings that smell like the future." "Fantastic. I've always wanted a scalp prophet." Chiron approached then, armor dark as obsidian, though his expression seemed just slightly more amused than usual, which, for Chiron, meant he didn't look actively murderous. "You've disrupted the balance," the warrior said without preamble. The Ark's pulse triggered tectonic murmurs, satellite reboots, and singing spores. "I'm not even sure if that last one's symbolic or a problem." Theo shrugged. "Look, I just bled on a stone and had a mild existential conversation with a cosmic voice. It's not like I opened a wormhole or anything." "Actually," Chiron said dryly, the southern sky cracked briefly around 0400. "We think it might have been a microtear in the atmosphere." "Good job." Theo flopped backward, staring up at the canopy of star-colored leaves. "Great. First contact, chosen one, interstellar hazard. I'm really padding out my resume." Queen Cirelli summoned him before midday. The Hall of Echoes, usually quiet and echoing with deliberate mystery, now buzzed with high-frequency vibrations and projected glyphs dancing midair. The council members looked particularly stressed, like professors forced to teach a class they hadn't read the syllabus for. Cirelli stood at the center, holding what looked like a crystalline medallion attached to thin metallic threads. She offered it without ceremony. "This is the key thread. It links your energy signature to the Arkansas. You must wear it at all times." Theo took it, turning it over in his hands. "Does it do anything besides clash with my fashion sense?" "It glows when you lie," one counselor said with unsettling cheer. Theo blinked. "That's not ideal." Another added, "And when the enemy is near." "Still not great." The queen raised her hand. "There is more." The ark did not just awaken. It sent a pulse, encoded, ancient, but strong. It was a beacon. Chiron stepped forward. "We intercepted fragments of the signal." It traveled past the nearest moon, entered subspace threading, and echoed through a pattern we haven't seen in generations. "What kind of pattern?" Theo asked. "A call," Chiron replied. "To any survivors. Or to any enemies still listening." A heavy silence settled over the chamber, broken only by the low hum of distant vines rearranging themselves. Somewhere, a bioluminescent fern sneezed. Cirelli's gaze locked on Theo. "If they come, we must be ready. You will need to train." Theo sighed, touching the pendant now resting on his chest. "Let me guess. More prophecy, less cardio." "This time," Chiron said, smirking faintly, "both." Training in Eluan wasn't like anything Theo had experienced on Earth. For starters, none of it involved running laps or shouting sergeants. Instead, he was strapped into a spherical chamber called a Gaersil, suspended in air by anti-grav roots and injected with a sequence of learning pulses, each one designed to trigger dormant neural pathways. The first session made him speak fluent Elyanian for 2 hours before he realized his mouth was on autopilot. The second made him see sound and color. The third introduced him to the ancient martial form known as veil-spanning blade, which mostly consisted of dodging very sharp things that sang insults in high-pitched soprano. Chiron stood nearby during each session, arms crossed, wearing the smug look of someone who knew you were going to trip on your own ego eventually. By the end of the week, Theo could summon a basic energy blade from the pendant's charge, read ancient glyphs without getting a migraine, and beat the temple's sentient chessboard in 3 out of 7 games. He also nearly electrocuted himself twice, accidentally made a rock cry, and learned, very awkwardly, that Elyanian meditation often involved hallucinating conversations with your past crushes. His high school lab partner was not impressed. One evening, after sparring with a combat drone that appeared to resent him personally, Theo and Chiron sat on the edge of a high perch overlooking the valley. The twin moons of Veridessa, 9 hovered low and full, bathing the trees in silver and indigo. Chiron handed him a flask. Theo sniffed it cautiously. "Is this the drink of prophecy?" "It's fermented tree sap," Chiron said. "Mildly hallucinogenic. Pairs well with revelations." Theo took a sip and immediately regretted it. It tasted like regret marinated in pine needles. "So," he said, coughing, "do you really think they're coming?" The signal was old, but clear. Someone will hear it. The question is who? Theo leaned back, watching a bird-like creature loop across the sky, trailing sparks from its wings. "You ever get tired of destiny?" he asked. "All these ancient texts, symbols, messianic recycling, it's a lot." Chiron was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I used to believe the prophecy was a myth. A fable to keep us from despair. Now you're here. And I'm not sure what's more terrifying, that it's real, or that it chose you." Theo raised his flask. Cheers to mutual disappointment. They drank. The silence stretched. Somewhere behind them, a chorus of vines began playing gentle notes, part lullaby, part cosmic jazz. Theo sighed and let the rhythm carry his thoughts away. Below, the ark stirred again. Just a whisper. Just a breath. And far, far above, beyond the sky, past the clouds and the moons, a ship woke from hibernation. Its hull was cracked, its systems unstable, but its core hummed as it registered the signal. Ancient coordinates flickered to life. In a ruined cockpit, something opened glowing eyes. And began to move. The ark had been silent for millennia, slumbering beneath the roots of Eluan like an ancient god with a long nap and a temper. Now, with each passing hour, it grew louder. Not in sound, but in presence. It was a hum in the bones, a pressure behind the eyes, a whisper in dreams that made even the elders stir at night and check the skies twice before speaking at dawn. Theo, meanwhile, was trying to make tea. The brewing vessel, an elegant, alien contraption of hovering rings and sound vibrations, had so far produced steam that smelled like toasted celery, then exploded into confetti. The confetti might have been symbolic. Or a prank. Elyanian instruction manuals were notoriously poetic. He sat on the edge of his quarters, staring at the cup now filled with something vaguely pink and fizzing. A Kleenaw had returned to roost in his boot and was snoring contentedly. Chiron appeared in the doorway, silent as ever. "The council wants you." Theo looked up. "Do they also want tea?" "It's aggressively experimental." Chiron stepped over the boot creature. "They want answers." "About the ark?" Chiron didn't respond. That was never a good sign. The Hall of Echoes was busier than usual. Holographic maps danced in the air, star charts, planetary trajectories, pulse-wave algorithms flickering in concentric spirals. Theo recognized none of it, which made him feel slightly less guilty for finishing his tea on the walk over. It had turned out to taste like carbonated memory. Sweet, confusing, and vaguely parental. Queen Cirelli stood at the center, her face lit by a rotating display of the Ark's signal pulse. The council members formed a half-circle behind her, looking more anxious than regal. She gestured toward the projection. A response has been detected. Theo blinked. A response? From who? The pattern is fragmented. But the source was triangulated to the derelict zone, a starless rift on the edge of the sector verge. Chiron added, no living vessel has passed through there since the sundering. It's where ships go to vanish. Theo scratched his head. That sounds like the kind of vacation spot you advertise with skull logos. Cirelli ignored him. We believe it is one of ours. A lost vessel, possibly a beacon-class harbinger. If it survived, it may carry fragments of our civilization. Records. Memory. Power. Or, Theo offered, zombies. One of the counselors, Vexer, the oldest and most stone-faced, gave him a look like Theo had just suggested juggling sacred relics. With his feet. Chiron stepped forward. The Queen proposes a retrieval mission. The Ark has awakened, its data threads require rebuilding. If the Harbinger carries the key fragments, they must be recovered. Theo folded his arms. Let me guess. I'm going. You're the only one the Ark responds to. Well, that's just excellent news, he said. Send the guy with the weird glowing wrist and a black belt in sarcasm into the haunted void. What could possibly go wrong? Cirelli's voice was calm, steady. You won't go alone. The hologram shifted, revealing a sleek ship, the Virelian. Compact, crescent-shaped, laced with bioneural strands and a hull that pulsed faintly with life. It looked like a predator carved from moonlight. Theo whistled. Fancy ride. Fast, shielded, and partially sentient, Chiron said. It prefers silence and well-tuned engine songs. Don't insult its aesthetic. Wasn't planning to. Do I bow to it or buy it dinner first? Just speak kindly. And don't touch the red panels. The launch took place at dusk, beneath the twin moons as they crossed paths in an eclipse that turned the sky into a bowl of blue fire. Villagers gathered in silence, some offering gifts, stones inscribed with memory runes, polished bones wrapped in silver thread, one very determined fruit with a face carved into it. Theo accepted them all with the solemnity of a man who had absolutely no idea what any of it meant. Allery hugged him 3 times, each with a whispered reminder not to accidentally marry an alien queen or fall into another shrine, unless it's a good one this time. Then the ship opened its mouth, because yes, it had one, and the ramp extended with a whisper. Chiron was already inside, configuring flight patterns with one hand while stabbing an unidentified root snack with the other. Theo took one last look at Eluan's glowing village, breathed in the electric scent of its air, and stepped into the Virelian. The ship sealed with a hum. Then, with barely a ripple, it rose. And vanished into the stars. Space, Theo quickly discovered, was much quieter when the ship you were on preferred not to talk. The Virelian communicated mostly through shifts in temperature, rhythmic pulses underfoot, and occasional bursts of music that Theo suspected were either system notifications or judgmental sighs. He explored the ship while Chiron piloted, finding everything oddly organic. The doors flowed open like muscle fiber, the chairs adjusted based on your mood, which once meant he was nearly horizontal during a mild panic, and the food printer sang lullabies in Eluanian while synthesizing something chewy and nutritious. It was surreal, beautiful, and deeply unsettling. 3 days into the journey, the void changed. The stars began to disappear. One by one, swallowed by a curtain of dark matter so dense it pulled at their thoughts. The derelict zone, Chiron said from the helm. Prepare for cognitive interference. Theo raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry, did you say cognitive interference? The ship shuddered gently. Some regions here project false signals. Echoes of memory, fractured timelines. Hallucinations are common. "Oh good," Theo muttered. "Love a good brain maze." As they pierced the edge of the rift, light seemed to bend. The Virelian's hull sang, a low, haunting tone that vibrated in Theo's chest. Ahead, a shape emerged. Massive. Dead. Drifting. The Harbinger-class vessel looked like it had been carved from the bones of a moon, with engines that hadn't fired in centuries. Hull plating was torn open in places, exposing faint glows within. And yet, the core still pulsed. Faint, but steady. Theo leaned forward. "That thing's alive." "Barely," Chiron said. "And waiting." The Virelian latched onto the docking ring with a hiss. The boarding tunnel unfolded. Lights flickered. Theo took a deep breath, gripped his pendant, and stepped into the ancient vessel. The air was dry and cold. Dust particles floated like tiny ghosts. Strange symbols lined the walls. Less graceful than Elunian script, more like hurried graffiti etched during a storm. As they moved deeper, the lights brightened. And a voice spoke through the static. "Designation, Ember. Welcome home." Theo froze. Chiron raised his weapon. And the corridor ahead lit up, revealing a chamber filled with suspended pods. Each one holding a figure. Sleeping. Breathing. And unmistakably, human. The stasis pods stood in rows like soldiers caught mid-dream, each one glowing faintly, rimmed in frost, filled with figures suspended in breathless stillness. Dozens of them. Men and women, all unmistakably human, their faces eerily peaceful beneath glass veils. Theo stumbled forward, hand pressed to the nearest pod. The face within could have belonged to someone he passed in a hallway back on Earth. Or someone he fought beside. Or maybe someone from the colony ships that had vanished years ago, swallowed by silence and void. "Impossible," he whispered. "They're us." Chiron circled slowly, eyes sharp. "I've seen old records. Some of your kind came through during the Great Drift. Escaped extinction. Fled the wars. But no one knew they survived." "They didn't just survive," Theo said. "They waited." He turned back to the wall behind the pods, where a flickering console pulsed weakly. It lit up at his touch, responding to his presence with ancient symbols that translated themselves slowly into something readable. Primary directive, sustain progeny of lost Earth. Secondary directive, await Ember signal. Below that, blinking gently. Awaiting Ember bearer. Signal received, ***. Theo stepped back, heart pounding. "They've been waiting, for me." Chiron raised an eyebrow. "You or someone like you." The Ark was built to preserve, not just knowledge, but people. The Ember was always meant to be the bridge. Theo didn't respond. His mind reeled, not just from the truth, but from what it meant. The prophecy, the Ark, the way his blood had awakened ancient systems like a forgotten key, this wasn't just Eluan's story. It was Earth's too. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The ship, this harbinger, this ghost, was waking up. The voice returned. Calm. Old. Gentle. Final protocols unlocking. Ember confirmed. "Shall we begin restoration?" Theo turned to Chiron, who gave the faintest nod. He placed his palm on the console. The pendant on his chest glowed bright, projecting lines of golden light that spread across the room like veins finding a heartbeat. The stasis pods pulsed once, then slowly, one by one, began to thaw. The return to Eluan was not quiet. The Virelian had to ferry back and forth 3 times, each trip carrying more of the humans roused from the Harbinger's deep sleep. Some awoke confused, others weeping. All were disoriented, emerging into a world that had moved on without them, a galaxy that had rewritten its borders and lost their names in the dust. But Eluan, to its credit, welcomed them not as intruders, but as kin. The Elunians, once fractured by fear, uncertainty, and millennia of hiding, opened their homes, offered food, shared songs. Children ran between species, laughing as though bloodlines had never mattered. Theo stood on the edge of the great terrace as the final group was brought in. He watched Sorelli embrace a weeping woman with pale red hair, then guide her into the village with the grace of someone who had long awaited this moment. Chiron approached. The ark is stabilizing. Whatever it was meant to do, it's ready. Theo nodded. And the Harbinger? Stripped its core and memory vaults. There's tech in there we haven't seen since before the stars broke. It could restore colonies, refuel ships, maybe even rekindle the deep lanes. Assuming nobody presses the wrong button. Chiron smirked. That's why I kept you away from the buttons. Theo chuckled softly. Good call. The days that followed blurred. Theo became something he'd never imagined, not a soldier, not a scout, but a symbol. A living thread between two peoples. The Queen's advisors called him Varadien, the one who stood between suns. He tried to make them stop. It sounded like a toothpaste brand. But the name stuck, because the story had. Allery followed him everywhere, naturally. She'd become something of a junior diplomat, personally appointing herself ambassador of snacks and teasing. Her latest campaign was to get Theo to agree to a new holiday in his honor, one that included mandatory naps and ceremonial pudding. I'm serious, she insisted one afternoon, dropping onto the bench beside him. You save a planet, you get a day. It's basic math. I didn't save the planet, he said. You woke up its heart. That's emotional saving. Better than regular saving. He gave her a tired smile. You should run for council. Too much paperwork. I'd rather be an oracle. Or a baker. Those two feel incompatible. Exactly why it'll work. The final activation ceremony was held beneath the twin moons. The Ark, now fully emerged from its ancient roots, stood like a cathedral of light and stone, its spires humming, its surface etched with symbols that had once seemed mythical but now glowed with purpose. Theo stepped into its heart chamber, alone. The console flared to life as he approached. Embers united. Systems online. Initiate threadcast, ****. Theo hesitated. What is it? The voice returned, clearer now. Younger. A message. One meant to travel beyond the edge. A signal of renewal. Theo thought of Earth. Of all the worlds lost. The ship still drifting in the dark. The voices still waiting to be heard. He placed his hand on the panel. Yes. Let's begin. The chamber lit up in spirals of gold and white, and a pulse shot skyward, up through the ark's spires, into the air, past the clouds, past the moons, past the sleeping dust of war. It carried more than coordinates. It carried hope. Weeks passed. The village expanded. The Harbinger's tech integrated into Eluan's bioarchitecture, creating hybrids of living and machine, vine-wrapped consoles, memory pools that could project holograms. Humans and Eluanians built side by side, laughter now a shared language. Theo still woke sometimes in the middle of the night, wondering if any of it had been real. But then he'd hear the faint chime of a vine reweaving itself or the sound of a Kleenex snoring in his sock drawer, and he'd remember. One morning, Sorelli found him by the fountain, the same one he'd fallen into weeks ago. You look tired, she said. He smiled. I think I'm finally not. She regarded him, then sat beside him, robes catching the light like woven constellations. You've changed. Have I? You no longer run from meaning. You carry it. Theo looked out over the village. Over the future. I used to think the universe was chaos. That all we could do was survive it. But now. Yes. Now I think maybe it was just waiting for someone to answer back. Sorelli nodded. And somewhere high above, beyond what any telescope could see, distant receivers blinked to life, one by one. The signal had been heard. The stars, once quiet, began to whisper back.